What would you give up in order to feel safe? That is not merely a personal question. It is a political one. Every modern society, democratic or authoritarian, capitalist or socialist, rests on an answer to that question.
How much liberty are we willing to surrender for security? How much power should the state hold in order to prevent chaos? In 1651, in the aftermath of civil war, a philosopher named Thomas Hobbes offered one of the most uncompromising answers. In the history of political thought, his book Leviathan remains one of the foundational texts of modern political theory. It is not simply a defense of authority. It is a radical rethinking of human nature, social order, law, religion, and sovereignty. Today, in a world of political polarization, institutional distrust, misinformation, and recurring debates about state power, from emergency powers to digital surveillance, Hobbes's arguments feel remarkably contemporary. This lecture explores why Leviathan still matters, what problem Hobbes believed he was solving, and whether his solution remains persuasive in our time. Historical context. Thomas Hobbes was born in 1588, the year of the Spanish Armada.
He lived through one of the most turbulent periods in English history, the English Civil War. This was not a minor political dispute. It was a violent struggle between Parliament and the monarchy that culminated in the execution of King Charles I in 1649.
For Hobbes, the Civil War was not merely a political failure. It was a philosophical catastrophe. It demonstrated what happens when political authority collapses, when competing claims to legitimacy, religious, parliamentary, royal, tear a society apart. Leviathan was published in 1651, while Hobbes was living in exile in Paris. The book was written as a systematic attempt to answer a single, urgent question: how can we create a political order strong enough to prevent civil war? Hobbes believed that previous political thought, especially Aristotelian and scholastic traditions, had misunderstood both human nature and the foundations of political authority. He sought to build political philosophy from the ground up, beginning not with tradition, but with an analysis of human psychology. The book mattered then because England had seen the unthinkable: a king executed, institutions shattered, society divided by religious fanaticism and ideological conflict. Hobbes wanted to prevent that from ever happening again. The core problem. At the heart of Leviathan lies a fundamental problem. What prevents human beings from destroying one another? Hobbes begins not with the state, but with the individual. Strip away institutions, laws, customs, and inherited authority. What remains? According to Hobbes, what remains is not a harmonious natural community. It is a condition he famously calls the state of nature. In that condition, there is no common authority, no shared power capable of enforcing rules, and because human beings are roughly equal in their physical and mental capacities, no one is secure. Even the strongest can be killed in their sleep. Even the most intelligent can be deceived. The result is not constant violence, but constant insecurity, a pervasive fear, a rational anticipation of conflict. In this condition, life becomes, in Hobbes' unforgettable phrase, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. The core problem Hobbes addresses then is this: how can we escape a condition of mutual fear and insecurity without falling back into chaos? 5 core ideas. 1. The state of nature and human equality. Hobbes' first major idea is that political philosophy must begin with a realistic account of human beings. He rejects the notion that humans are naturally sociable or oriented toward the common good. Instead, he argues that humans are driven by appetites and aversions, by desires for power, security, recognition, and survival. Importantly, he insists on a form of natural equality, not equality of virtue, but equality of vulnerability. Because we are equally capable of harming one another and equally capable of fearing one another, we exist in a condition of mutual suspicion. This equality is what makes conflict universal. This insight remains powerful today. Modern geopolitics often mirrors Hobbes' state of nature.
In the absence of a global sovereign, states exist in a condition of strategic distrust. Even peaceful nations maintain military capabilities, not necessarily out of aggression, but out of fear. 2. The social contract. Hobbes' second core idea is the social contract. To escape the state of nature, individuals collectively agree to transfer their rights to a single authority. Each person says, in effect, I authorize the sovereign to act on my behalf, provided everyone else does the same. This act of mutual authorization creates a commonwealth, an artificial person, a political body greater than any individual. Crucially, the sovereign is not party to the contract. The contract is among subjects. The sovereign's authority is the product of their collective agreement. This idea remains foundational in modern political theory. Even democratic constitutions rest on the idea that legitimate authority arises from collective authorization. Whether through elections or founding charters, political order is not natural, it is constructed. 3. Sovereignty and indivisible power. Hobbes' third key argument is that sovereignty must be absolute and undivided. If power is fragmented between church and state, between rival institutions, conflict reemerges. For Hobbes, divided sovereignty invites civil war. There must be a final authority whose decisions are binding. Law must have a single source. This claim is controversial. Modern constitutional systems deliberately divide power, executive, legislative, judicial, to prevent tyranny. Yet even today, we recognize that legal systems require finality. Courts issue binding judgments. States enforce laws. Hobbes forces us to confront a difficult truth. Without enforceable authority, law is merely advice. 4. Law, obligation, and fear. Hobbes grounds political obligation not in virtue or tradition, but in rational self-interest. We obey the sovereign because doing so preserves peace and security. Fear in Hobbes' system is not irrational. It is politically productive. The fear of punishment sustains order. The fear of returning to chaos justifies obedience. This is a sobering view. It strips politics of moral romance. But it also explains why even flawed governments can maintain stability, because the alternative may be worse. Consider fragile states today. Where central authority collapses, non-state actors fill the vacuum. Armed groups, militias, warlords, these are modern reminders of Hobbes' warning. Order, even imperfect order, can be preferable to anarchy. 5. Religion and political authority. One of the most overlooked parts of Leviathan is Hobbes' analysis of religion. He believed religious disputes were a major cause of civil conflict. To prevent religious strife from undermining political order, Hobbes argues that religious authority must be subordinated to civil authority. The sovereign determines public doctrine. This does not eliminate private belief, but it prevents rival institutions from competing for ultimate loyalty. In a world where religious and ideological polarization still shapes politics, Hobbes' concern about competing sources of authority remains relevant. Whenever parallel structures of legitimacy arise, tension with the state is inevitable. Modern relevance. Why does Leviathan still matter? First, it speaks directly to debates about security and liberty. In times of crisis, pandemics, terrorism, war, states expand their powers. Citizens accept restrictions for safety. Hobbes would say this is rational. Security is the precondition for all other goods. Second, Hobbes illuminates international relations. Without a global sovereign, nations exist in a Hobbesian condition. Deterrence theory, arms races, alliances, all reflect strategic distrust among formerly equal actors. Third, Hobbes helps us understand institutional trust. When citizens lose faith in the legitimacy of institutions, when they reject shared authority, political order becomes fragile. Hobbes reminds us that sovereignty is not self-sustaining. It depends on collective recognition. Fourth, his work is relevant to debates about misinformation and public authority. If multiple actors claim to define truth, if there is no shared arbiter, public discourse fragments. Hobbes feared precisely this kind of epistemic chaos. Finally, Leviathan challenges romantic notions of politics. It asks whether order itself is a moral achievement. In an era of ideological certainty, Hobbes offers a more restrained, perhaps more tragic vision. Politics is about preventing the worst, not achieving perfection. Balanced interpretation.
Hobbes' strengths are clear. He offers a systematic theory grounded in psychology. He identifies insecurity as the central political problem. He understands the fragility of order. He also introduces a modern, secular account of political legitimacy. Authority is not divine, it is constructed. Yet, criticisms abound. First, many argue that Hobbes underestimates human sociability. Anthropological evidence suggests that cooperation and moral norms emerge even without centralized authority. Second, his defense of absolute sovereignty appears to justify authoritarianism. If the sovereign cannot be resisted, what protects citizens from abuse? Hobbes's answer is pragmatic. Rebellion risks a return to chaos. But critics argue that unchecked power invites tyranny. Third, Hobbes' reduction of politics to fear and self-interest seems overly narrow. Modern democracies rely not only on fear, but on trust, participation, and shared values. Finally, Hobbes may overstate the inevitability of conflict in the absence of centralized authority. Federal systems, constitutional checks, and pluralistic societies suggest that divided power need not produce civil war. Yet it is important not to caricature Hobbes. He is not advocating cruelty. He is not glorifying domination. He is diagnosing a problem, the danger of unrestrained competition among equals. Reflective conclusion. So we return to our opening question. What would you give up in order to feel safe? Hobbes would answer, almost everything, if the alternative is civil war. Whether we agree depends on how we assess risk. Do we fear tyranny more than chaos, or chaos more than tyranny? Leviathan forces us to confront a sobering possibility, that political order is artificial, fragile, and sustained by collective agreement. It is not guaranteed by nature. It is not secured by optimism. It exists because we choose, together, to authorize it. In a time of institutional distrust and global instability, Hobbes's warning remains clear. When we undermine shared authority without providing a viable alternative, we gamble with the foundations of peace. The artificial state may be imperfect, but without it, we may discover how much worse the natural condition can be. And that is why more than 3 centuries later, Leviathan still speaks to us.